Welcome back, guys. So let's take a look at rendering inside Unreal 5. So in class we started from this project here, and I thought about it, and it's really not necessary. So you can just start from this blank one. It's just less things to delete, I guess. But either or, if you just want to have this little thing here, this color checker, it's kind of nice to have, so you can sort of see things. If things are sort of overexposed or underexposed, you can use this as a guide. But either or would work. Right? And I just turn all these off for now. So this is a fresh project, and the first thing you want to do is just go to Edit and Project Settings. In here we want to scroll down to where it says Rendering. And you can do this in one hit. We did it in two goes in class, but thinking back at it, we can just do it in one go, really. So over here, we want to make sure that Virtual Textures is turned on. And if we scroll down a little bit more to where we have the Lumens section, we want to make sure that Hardware Ray Tracing is turned on. Ray Trace Shadows is turned on, and then Hardware Ray Tracing when available is turned on. And keep the rest as is. You will need to restart the scene, so a little pop-up box should come up here, and just press restart. So this is the blank one that we started off with. I'm just gonna get rid of this, so we all start from the same spot. All right, so you should have something like this. I've just grabbed the detail and outliner. It's normally stacked on top of each other like this. I've just taken that out and popped that to the side because we do kind of want the vertical space to be able to scroll up and down in the next couple bits. So you can see that we have a whole bunch of stuff here. We don't really need any of this stuff right now. I kind of want to start from scratch. So just going to grab pretty much everything in this scene and just delete it. So just right click, and in Edit we can go to Delete. Or in this case, I have to do it individually. Okay. So yes, just delete everything. Should leave you with a dark scene with nothing. Great, so I'm going to press Control Spacebar to bring up my content drawers, and I'm just going to dock this into the UI just for now, and I'm going to create a new folder. So just right click in the scene, the panel, sorry, and just create a new folder. And I'm just going to create this 3D models. Let's go models, and in here, because we're going to use this as our render scene for every 3D model that we make, it's going to create a new folder for the character / creature that we're working on. So I'm just going to call this creature, and I'm going to import a couple of things. So I'm just going to right click and then go to import at the top here, and I think I saved it to my desktop. So over here we've just exported everything out of Substance Painter. I'm going to start off with the creature itself. Go import, and there's a few things that we want to set here. So I'm just going to reset to default, so we're all starting from the same point. And under Advanced, we want to open this drop down menu. And then I'm going to untick Remove Degenerates. And then I'm going to combine the mesh together. This is just so we have one mesh and not all different pieces. So if you're in Substance Painter, if you separated things out, like the shirt, the clothing, accessories, and the body, armor, etc. If you don't tick this, you'll have them all separate in your inside Unreal. So they'll be all separate files essentially. but we want to have one file. So press import. Great. So just some smoothing group issues, but everything seems to be fine. And we have our creature right here. Now I'm going to proceed to import all the UDIMs. So I'm going to right click, go to import, just grab all of these guys here. So just shift click all of them, go open, and it should just import. Now if you've enabled virtual textures, you shouldn't see every single file. Unreal should be able to read everything and then pop that into the appropriate files here. So you can see that we've got a body, so 3 for the body, 3 for the eyes, 3 for the fingers, and 3 for the toenails, and so on. Great. So I'm going to drag and drop this guy into the scene. That's my character. And in the details panel, I'm just going to 0 the transform so it's in the center of the world. Let's press F to zoom in, focus on this guy. He's going to be really small because ZBrush has a really small unit size. So let's just crank up the scale. So I'm going to lock this scale and then just click and drag to increase the size. So my my pivot point's off. I can fix that in max if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it as is. So I'm going to pick something like 20. Right. So is that a decent size? Okay. And if I wanted to get this exactly on the ground plane, I can press this button here on the top right, and that will give me my 4 viewports. And where it says front, in this case I don't have a front, but we got back. I'm just going to change one of these guys anyway, so maybe this one here to front. And let's just rotate this guy. So I want him to be sitting or standing on this green line here. And I'm going to rotate him so he's facing us. Right. Alright, so that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to maximize my perspective viewport again. And he's sitting right on to the grid. So there's nothing here. Well, you can't see anything because there's no lights. You can sort of kind of see his legs. But that's just because it's on the grid. So we need to add some lights in here. There's a couple of things that we're going to do first, and that's we need to add a post-processing volume. Right, this will allow us to add post-processing to the render itself, change some types, do some color correction and some slight tweaks, as well as what we're going to do is set up the scene or the post-processing to drive the overall brightness of the scene. So I'm going to add that now. I'm just going to go to the toolbar here, and on the left where it says quickly add to the project, I'm going to open up that drop down menu and then navigate to where it says volumes. And we want to find post-process volume, which is here. That's going to add that right into the scene. You can just pop that to the side if it's in the way, because what we're going to do is edit this so it affects the whole world infinitely. So right now, by default, it only affects anything within this box. So if I drag this box over on top, it will just affect that. But I want it to affect everything. So I'm just going to drag that to the side. And then in the search bar here, I'm going to type so unbound. And we're looking for this here right at the bottom. So where it says post-process volume settings, infinite extend unbound, we want to make sure that's ticked. Like I said, this is just going to make sure that the post-processing doesn't just happen within this box, but everywhere throughout the scene. So this can just be anywhere and it wouldn't matter. So I'm just going to pop that to the side. A couple of things that we're going to do is set the post-processing to drive the ambient light in the scene, or the overall lighting in the scene, not the ambient light, sorry. So what I mean by that is that if I go to my outliner and just add a light in here. So we have our creature, our post-processing volume. I'm just going to add a light, and this light I'm going to delete later. But so you don't have to do this. But I'm going to add maybe a rec light, which we have here. Just going to rotate that so you can sort of see it. Right now, if we have two of these, you know, it's nice. We have to really sort of mess around with the intensities quite a lot here to get the look that we're going for. And whilst you want to do this, I think it's nice to have an overall brightening sort of setting, right? So if I want to just overall brighten the scene up, I'll have to go to each and one of these lights and just increase the intensity on everything. Right. It'll be nice to have a slider that just brightens up the scene, right? So I'm going to delete this and keep this light here as a demonstration. And I'm just going to put that in a more suitable spot, something like that. And now in our post-processing volume, we want to go to the exposure section. So we can type that in, or it's just down here a little bit. So in the search bar, if you just type in EXP for exposure, it will pop up right at the top here. And we want to enable the first three. Right? Now it looks like nothing has changed, and that's because we have to adjust the auto exposure to manual. So the scene will go completely dark, and that's because we need to compensate the exposure with this slider. So you can see we're brightening up the scene and we're darkening up the scene. So we can have lights within the scene itself and then drive the overall brightness with this slider here. And that's the way I like to work when I'm rendering inside Unreal. So what I can do is just set up some lights here. So there's a few ways we can do this. There's plenty of different lighting methods, but there are sort of, there's heaps, but there's a few that I like to do more often than not, and that is the classic 3-point light setup. So 3 points of light. So if I go to the top view here, there will be a light on one side of the character, which we have here. Then this light will be the key light, so that will be the main light source. And then you have a fill light, which will generally be on the opposite side. This will be a softer light, which will just fill the shadows up a bit. And then you have a rim light, and the rim light will generally is on the back of the subject, and it's just to lift the subject off the background a little bit. And the rim light comes from this sort of look here. So if I just bring this down a little bit, bring it a little bit closer, you can see there's a rim of light around the edge. So that's why we call it a rim light. So this 3-point light setup is a classic lighting setup. And if you just want something that looks good, you can just work with a 3-point light setup. Now we have a half face setup, which is, as the name suggests, it's a half face, half lit, half not lit. So if I go to 270 in the rotation, we have a light that is splitting the face into 2 parts. So we have a lit part, could bring that back a bit, a well lit part, and then half the face is in the shadow. So a lot of the times the lighting setup is the name sort of describes the shadow that is created on the body, or on the face in this case. So we've got a half split, so we're half in the shadows, half in the light, and this can create a really nice dramatic sort of lighting setup. Angle this a little bit so it can be a little bit softer if we wanted to. We'll just bring this over. Now what I'm going to do here is just change my UI so we have a split view, because I want to be able to look at this but also be able to change the light here. So I'm going to adjust that right now because it's sort of getting in the way of me doing this and this and this and this. So all we're going to do here is just go to Windows and viewports and just add another viewport. You should have this set up. If it's floating like this, just grab this tab and just dock it into the left here. Right. You might have to play around for it a bit for it to sort of dock in there like that, but we get it once we play around for it a bit. So I'm just gonna, just for now, I'm just gonna sort of look at this, and this is not gonna be the final sort of view or anything. This is just for us to preview the light. So again, this is a split light, and then we have another one called a Rembrandt. Right? This is described by a sort of, or the name comes from an artist back in the medieval times, which he would have a very particular way of painting, and the light comes from, or the shape comes from the nose, right? And obviously my character doesn't quite have a typical nose, but on a human, what would happen is that the light will go on one side of the character, hit the nose, and then on the cheek we would see a little triangle under the eye, and that's a little light, and that's what we call a Rembrandt light, right? So that's the shape, the light shape that appears on the face. So it's typically a light that's angled on one side, kind of like this. And I guess you can kind of see it, but you can see on my character, right below the eye, there's a triangle-like shape. And that's a Rembrandt style light. And that's created from the nose occluding the light, and then the light passing above the nose onto the cheek of the subject. Right. And that's a really nice light because it's quite soft, but it's also, you can create a quite dramatic sort of scene. So that's another light that I choose often. If I'm creating a really dramatic sort of spooky scene that has really harsh shadows or something like that, the light that I like to use is called a butterfly light. So I'm just going to reset my lights here, and the butterfly light is just a single light, and the key light, which is the main light, will be sitting right above the character, generally in front of the character a little bit, and then facing down towards the subject like this. And I'm going to bring this up because it's a bit too strong. Right. And the butterfly-like characteristics is created by the nose again. That's occluding the light. And again, my character doesn't quite have a typical nose, but above the lip, which is right here, you will see a butterfly-like shape created from the nose blocking the light source, and then the rest of the light hitting the top of the lip, and it'll create a butterfly shape, and that's a butterfly light setup. It's really cool because you can create a really dramatic look like we have here. I just think it's really nice sort of light to work with. Right. So those are the lighting setups that I like to use if we're creating some light sources. And I'll show you how you can create a lighting scene quite easily within Unreal without doing too much. So what I'm going to do is just set up this the rest of the scene. So I'm going to set up the materials for this character. So I'm going to highlight the character, and you can see that we have a whole bunch of material slots here. So we can create a new material. If yours came in with different materials, you can just use the one that's in here already. But what I'm going to do is create a new material for each of these guys here. So I'm just going to right click and create new material, right? And this is for the body. So I'm just going to write in body and just double click this. So it should create a new window. And I'm just going to resize this so we can sort of see things. Like we want to see the contents panel as well. Actually, it doesn't really matter because we can open up the contents panels here. Right. So the setup that I want to use is I want to be able to take advantage of this subsurface color. Now you only do this if you're creating a fleshy sort of character here. So you only do this on skin, some sort of meat or something like that. And this will allow for the light to pass through the surface, scatter around and bounce back out. And this is how light behaves in real life. Everything has some sort of subsurface scattering, even if it's a tiny little bit. And on people, it's more prominent than not. So I'm just going to search something up here in Google just so you can see what I'm sort of referring to. So basically this is the subsurface scattering, where light will pass through thin areas of the skin and light up inside the flesh of the subject. Right? So you can see that particularly in, like, for example, this sort of fruit part has subsurface scattering. You can see here different levels of subsurface scattering, right? It's less here and then there's more. And you can see this effect when you get a torch or a pretty strong torch and shine it through your hand, or put your hand on it, and you can see the light coming through the thinner areas of the hand. And this will help with that. Great, so let's change the shading model here in the details of this shader from default to subsurface. And this will give us access to this subsurface color. So what I'm going to do here is open up my content drawers and just navigate to where I have my textures. Then I'm going to drag and drop this into the scene. Right, this will be our base color, but instead of piping that into here for this particular model, because we have a fleshy sort of subject here, I'm going to pipe this into the subsurface color. And then I'm going to grab the normals. Of course, that will go into the normal. And then this last one is a 3-in-1. So it's using the RGB values to store the occlusion, which is stored in the red channel. Roughness is stored in the green channel, and metallic is stored in the blue channel. Right, so I'm just going to pipe that into where it should be. So ambient occlusion, green is roughness, and blue is metallic. So you can see that here, which is great. So I'm just going to press save. And then what we can do in our scene is apply that shader to one of these balls. So I think it was this one here on my character that was the body. So I'm just going to drag and drop that onto it. And that looks right to me. So that looks good. And you can see that we're getting our nice color come through. Great. So I'm going to set up a camera to render this out, or to just get the right field of view and things like that. And the camera we want to use is a cine camera. So on the left here, I want this to be my render space, and on the right, I want this to be my working space. So I'm going to go to the toolbar again and go to where it says camera, or cinematic, sorry. And I want to add this one here, Cine Camera Actor. And this is great because we have a lot of settings that are what you typically find on a real camera. Right? So on the left here, I'm going to change the perspective viewport to Cine Camera. And if we wanted to, we can change that to a cinematic viewport. Right? This will just hide any sort of like these things, like bounding boxes and little icons and things like that, that we don't need to see. So we can see that here. This is our character. Oops. This is our character. And this is getting in the way, this preview of this Cine Camera Actor, which is quite annoying. So I'm just going to turn that off. Right. So in edit, we can go to editor preferences, and then in the search bar, I'm going to type in preview. And just scroll down a little bit and it will be this one here. So level editor viewports, preview selected cameras. Just turn that off and then it won't be in the way anymore. So I'm just going to pick a fairly nice sort of shot here. I think this will be fine for this particular butterfly shot. I think a butterfly light setup, which is what I have right now, works really well for straight on shots like this. I'm going to zero out the camera so it's right in the center here. So in the settings, there's a few things that I want to do. So the film back, I'm going to change that to a full frame DSLR. Like that. And then I'm going to open up the lens settings. Just check that out for a bit. I think this should be fine. I'm going to open up the focus settings and I'm going to change the method, well, leave the method as manual, but I'm going to adjust the focus distance. So we can enable this draw debug focus mode, so we can sort of see where the focal point is, and you can see it's all the way at the back here. So we can adjust it by going to this slider here, right? Bring it forward and back. Or what we can do is just grab this little eyedropper, click this, and then sample the focus point on your subject. In this case, it will be the face. So I'm going to bring that all the way up, turn this debug off, and that will give us a nice field of view, a nice focus plane. And we can make adjustments. We can bring this back a little bit if we wanted to. So scrolling down still, the current focal length is 35. I think in class we had it quite low. And this is kind of where I get a little bit confused sometimes because focus length, field of view is different. So I want this pretty high. So at an 85 or something like that works really well for like portrait shots. If you're doing like a landscape or something like that, you want it fairly low. So around 50 or 30, right? But for this sort of portrait style shot, I'm going to go for an 85 field of view. Right? And I'm going to bring this camera back a bit. And see how it's sort of snapping to these certain points. This is this button up here. It's snapping to every 10-degree increments or 10 unit increments. So I'm just going to turn that off for now, just so I can get this exactly where I want it to. And then I'm going to refocus like that. If you wanted to, you can change this to an auto focus and all right. Sorry, my kid just came in. He just woke up. So I lost where I was. Yeah, so focal length 85. Good for portraits. I think that's it in here. We don't really need to play with any of that. So the post-processing on the camera we don't need to play with because we're going to drive everything through the post-process volume. So you don't need to do anything really. Just got to get a nice sort of shot here. Right. So now that the camera is set, let's play around with the scene to get it to look nice. Right. So this light's probably a bit too strong. Right. So what I'm going to do is just reduce the attenuation radius, and that's just essentially the fall off. So I don't want it to be so strong, but I'm not going to adjust the intensity at all. Right, so I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. Like that. And I might bring this up as well. So right now the gizmo is set to a world space, which can be quite difficult to get the right angle. So I like the angle here and I want to keep that angle, but I don't want to just move it up. So what I'm going to do is just click this button here, which transforms the gizmo to a local space. And I can just move this back a little bit to get a lighting setup that I'm happy with. And I like this so far. I might bring this forward a little bit more to bring a little bit more of the face in. And then I'm going to take angle snaps off, which is this one here in the viewport tools. And I'm just going to angle that a little bit more. I might bring that up a little bit as well. Maybe like that, but then increase the attenuation. Oops. Maybe something like that, right? And then what I'm going to do is just increase the exposure on this character. So I actually want to bring it down a little bit and then bring this forward. So it's kind of like a you know, it's you got to go back and forth and get the right settings, because what I was not happy with before was I like the way this looks so far, but this is overexposed, the top of the head. So I wanted to get it back to where it was original. I want to get it to about here, I think, where both areas are somewhat well exposed, right? And that way I can bring this light forward a little bit to brighten up the front of the face whilst keeping this fairly well sort of lit as well. Okay, so I think I like that. And you know, you're not going to get the lighting perfect on the first try. Like, there's a lot of back and forth going on to get it to the way you like it. And this is looking pretty good. So I might stick with this for now, and I'll probably will make changes later on. But let's jump into the post-processing volume, and let's just go through each one of these sort of settings. So I'm going to bring this divider all the way up so we can see all of this, and let's just move through each one of these one by one. So mobile depth of field, we don't need that. We can add a bit of bloom if we wanted to, so you can add some bloom here, so let's increase the intensity. And then you can sort of, what I like to do is just crank the number all the way up, right? Just to see what effects we're getting. So you can see it's 8, it brightens things up and sort of soften things out as well. And low, it's just nothing. And if we want to reset it back to default, we can always click this little button here. Okay. Keep in mind, a lot of these sliders go up to a certain point, like 8, but we can add in a custom number on a lot of them. Not all of them can do this, but a lot of them do, right? So that's what 100 looks like. So I think adding a bit of bloom will just add a bit more interest to my scene, to just brighten up these areas a little bit. And we can always go back and adjust this later. I typically don't play with anything else. I don't go into advanced or anything like that. So exposure, we don't need to play with any of that but this slider, and we're pretty happy. Well, I'm pretty happy with this at the moment, so I'm going to leave it as is. Chromatic aberration is the light splitting when it comes back into the camera lens. So you see this on camera lenses where the light will go into the lens, and then because the lens has some sort of split, like it splits the light rays, and then you got the RGB values splitting, and you can see that on the edges of our model of photos and things like that. You typically see that a lot in older photos, photos taken by older cameras. So I'll bring up an example here, and you can sort of see what I'm talking about. So basically the lens, the light's going into the lens and then splitting like this. So you can see that happening here where you get that sort of effect, right? And you can see that typically in older cameras or older sort of photographs and things like that, where you get that effect, right? So you can see that here. That's the chromatic aberration. And that's just there to add a bit more realism to your renders. You see that here, that's more of a force effect, but you can see that chromatic aberration happening, right? So that's what that is. I'm going to add a little bit. So increase the intensity. So I'm going to crank this up so you can see the effects here. And you see it on the fringes of the model. So you see that there and up here. It almost has that sort of fake 3D effect when you wear those blue and red glasses. So you only want a little bit. You don't want that to be the main focus. So maybe about 2. And toggle this on and off so you can see the difference. So 2 is probably a bit too much. Great. So maybe 1 for this for now, and then we can move on. So dirt mask, you can add things on top of the scene if you wanted to. I don't have anything loaded in this one yet, but I do have in my other one. But just so you can see what it does, these ones here, I think they're just textures, but they do add something, so you can sort of see this in action. Let's pick something that you can actually see something. Let's see this one here. So you can sort of see the change here. There's a split in the light. This is where I'll add like grunge textures and things like that, just to add a little bit more interest to the scene. Let's see if I can pick something that you can see. But basically, it's just an overlay of this this texture that you're going to add. I don't have anything right now, so I'm just going to turn that off. And if you want to play around the more camera-like settings, you can play around with that in here. So ISO for dark scenes, and crank that up if you want it to be brighter, and so on. So if you're more used to working with cameras, you can play with all this. So I don't normally play with any of this stuff. Lens flares, we can add a little bit here if we wanted to. So I can crank this number all the way up and increase the bokeh size. Just see if we can get something going here. There's not much happening here. That's because we're not really looking at the camera or at the light itself, right? So if I go into my Cine camera and just rotate this, I should be able to see some lights. Maybe not, because the camera is not, light's not very strong. Right? Yeah. Depends on the angle sometimes. And that's basically when the light hits the lens of the camera and it creates the bokeh or light flares. So the bokeh effect is quite nice. You'll sort of, this is what I'm talking about. If I just bring up some images, which is sort of this sort of stuff here. Right. So if the light is going into the camera, you can adjust that bokeh effect, and you can get that look. Right. Where was I? Here. Okay. So bokeh size, not really getting anything. So I might have to adjust the camera or increase the intensity or something. But on my other model, I do have something because the light is sort of hitting the camera. And I'll show you that after this. Right, so I'm just going to turn that off for now. Image effect, that's the vignetting, which is the darkening on the sides here. So the vignetting gives focus onto the subject that you're trying to capture. So you'll see that in this example here. So I'm going to bring up an image. So this is basically a vignette where you have the darkening of the sides, and it can go in the opposite direction as well. So the light, it can go lighter on the side as well. And vignetting just focuses the subject a bit more. So it darkens the parts that aren't important, which on this case, you'll see that these areas here are not important, and just puts more focus on the subject itself. So I'm going to add a little bit of vignetting, and you can see that happening down here. And it will be more prominent on shots that have a background. Right now it's just black, so you don't see too much of it. But once I add a little bit of fog into this, you'll see that it does add an effect. So depth of field, I don't want to play with that because we are using the camera to adjust the depth of field. And then we have some general color grading stuff here. So if you want to make it warmer, you can increase that or decrease that. So you've got a warm scene, so it's more reddish, and a cold scene for more blue, right? So obviously you don't, depending on what you're doing, you don't want to crank this all the way to one side or the other. But if you want the scene, so this is just a normal sort of white light. So this is kelvins, which is light, or sorry, heat or something like that. Is a light measurement. So you can see that here in this example. See if I can find a larger image. So this one here, you can see that it's 1000 kelvins, 10,000 kelvins. So let's see if I can find another example. Here's another example. So it's basically the brightness of the light, right? Yeah, so we can increase this or decrease it. It's up to you. I can give it a little bit of warmth to this scene by adjusting this. And then I'm going to go into the saturation. So we can do an overall saturation or desaturation by dragging this slider, or we can just adjust the RGB values individually here. So red, green, and blue. So if I want to reduce the greens, I can just slide this down a little bit, which I kind of do, I think. So normally I'll just go to each side and just see what I like. I think I want to drag these guys down a little bit. Right. And of course you got contrast, gamma, which increases the brightness or the gamma of the scene. I don't really understand this all too much. All I know is that it sort of brighten things up and darken things as well. Right. I'm going to leave that to 1. And then gain and offset, which do similar sort of things, but kind of contrasts the scene as well. Right. Shadows, you can adjust the shadows. So individual, so you know, you've got blues and contrast the shadows, and you can color correct the shadows, basically the midtones and the highlights as well. So I normally leave this as is if I'm not doing anything to it. I'm pretty happy with how it looks though. Next we got the miscellaneous areas. So we can add LUTs here, so lookup tables, which is essentially you can download free ones online, but essentially what you are putting in here is kind of think of it like an Instagram filter. And I'll work with LUTs towards the end and not use the full strength of it, just adjust the strength to be quite low. That can just add a little bit of interest to this you're seeing as well. Or if you're doing something heavily stylized, you can add a LUT to it. Or if you want consistency in different shots, you can add a LUT to it, and every shot will have a similar sort of look and feel. Skipping over this stuff, skipping over this, and then I think that's pretty much it. There's film grain down here, so if you want to add a bit of film grain, which I normally do, right? You can increase the size, and that creates a sort of realistic, more realistic look. So if I crank this up, you can see the fuzziness happening here. And I just want a little bit, right? And I don't want the size to be so big as well. Right? I want it fairly small. Something like that. Great, so we're almost done with this shot here. What I want to do is add a little bit more interest in the background and around these areas here. We might have to come back in here to make some final adjustments. So I'm going to go to my outliner, and I'm going to add a volumetric fog or volumetric height fog. So I think you can get that in here. Maybe. I don't know. Anyways, how I do it, maybe you can't find it in there. It's probably in there somewhere. Oh, it's in here, visual effects. So exponential height fog. Right. How I normally do it is just go to Windows, Environment Light Mixer, and just add that here. So create hard fog. And then we have that in our outliner. And what I wanted to do here is just have some fog in the scene, right? Just to add a little bit more interest around these areas. So I'm going to increase the density, just crank these numbers up just to see what they do. And I want to enable volumetric fog, so you can sort of see the light messing with that fog a bit, right? So if I crank this up, if I come to here, you can sort of see how the light is hitting that fog. And this is how you can create God rays, right? So this is too much. I don't want that much in the scene. So I'm just gonna mess around the scattering distribution. Might increase that to make it a bit sharper. Right. This kind of sharpens the rays up, so it's more, sort of affects the camera a bit more, right? So if it's going into the lens of the camera, you can sort of see it a bit better, right? As opposed to kind of everywhere, the light God rays is kind of happening everywhere. This sort of sharpens that up a bit. So going back to the light fog, we can mess around with all of this stuff if we wanted to. In the light itself, there is a setting down here about volumetric scattering intensity. We can play around with that as well. There's a subtle effect on mine, but on yours it might be a lot more. So you kind of got to go back and forth between the light and the height fog itself. So I'm going to decrease this, I think. Just not have it so obvious. I'm just going to toggle this light fog on and off just to see if I like that. And maybe play around with this distribution a little bit. I want to see this a bit better. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. I'll increase that back. Just add a little bit here. Like that. So I do like the look of that. I might go in and change this a little bit. So the last thing that you can do is just make some adjustments inside the material itself. So you can sort of see we've got a nice scene here that we can render out. But if we want to make any sort of changes, so for example, the skin on mine is a bit too shiny for my liking. We can add a linear interpolate inside Unreal, the material editor, to adjust the roughness or anything really. So over here we have green, which is going to our roughness. Sorry, not green. Yeah, green. So what I'm going to do is just disconnect that. So I can press Alt and left mouse button onto the node, and that will disconnect that. And what I want to do is pipe this into a linear interpolate. So I'm going to right click and type in LERP. So LERP, that's like the nickname for linear interpolate. And basically we're merging A and B together, right? And how Unreal works is it works off these numbers. So 1 is like white and 0 is black, right? So think of it as like a gradient, right? So if we grab green and pop that into A and then merge that with a 1, that will make that not rough at all. So you can sort of see, if I pipe this into the roughness, you can see that there's full roughness. There's no shine on this shader ball here. But if I bring that to 0, it will be basically what we had before, where it'll be really shiny, as you can see here. So I want like a happy medium I don't want it too shiny, but I want a bit of shine there. So I'm going to make that maybe like 0.7, just see how that looks. You can see there's a bit of shine, but it's not too shiny. I'm just going to press apply and save. And you'll see that update in our render view. So you can see that change there. So you can see this. I'm going to take a screenshot. So Windows Shift S is to take a snippet. And I'm going to pop that into Paint like this. And then I'm going to bring that all the way back to 0 again. Press apply. And then take another screenshot. And pop that right next to the other one. So you can see the difference there, right, between a 0.7 roughness in the lerp and a 0. This is what we had originally. I think I like this a lot better. Although I think I want a little bit more shine. So I'm just going to bring this back over to the right and maybe give this a 0.8 instead of a 0.7. Take another screenshot. And you can see the differences here. So let's see. No, not 0.7. I was like, it's less. So I don't want less. I want a little bit more, I think. So 0.6 is what I wanted. So press apply. And in my thing here, I'm just going to delete that. And then take another screenshot of this. Oops. This one. Just pop that in there. So you can see the differences there. This is so there's 0, 0.6, and 0.7. I think I like this one where there's a little bit of a shine to the skin. So I'm just going to exit that or minimize that. And yeah, that's the scene. So I think that's done with this one. I'll probably need to do a full render later. But I do like this shot with this butterfly light, this singular light setup. The other Unreal scene I have is the one that we had in class. So this one I added a little bit more to it. And it's much more spookier in terms of the scene. It's much more ominous. And it's still using a single light, except it's less dramatic, I think. Although the light's not as sharp as this other one, right? Where we have really deep and dark sort of shadows. And I'm using the same sort of light. I'm using a rec light. I've just increased the barn doors to sort of direct that light a little bit more downwards. And you'll see that on real life rectangular lights, right? This sort of barn door thing that we have here. I really didn't do much to this besides in the post-processing volume. I just added all of these guys into it. So you can sort of see here the lens flares were working before, but they're kind of not anymore. But we did have a bit of lens flares here. And I added a dirt mask, which is just a grunge that sort of sits on the top, and it's very, very subtle. So you can sort of see that here. But I've just brought it down, so it's a very subtle effect that just sort of breaks up the solid colors here a bit more. You can sort of slightly see it here. And all those little things add quite a lot to the scene, I think. You can sort of see everything I've done here. There's a bit of vignetting and the color grading. I didn't really play around with the temperature. I did play around with the saturation. That's about it. I didn't play around with any of these. I do have a lookup table here, so you can sort of see that effect. It's a very subtle effect. I think I like it without it, to be honest. And I've just brought that down all the way to 0.5, so very minimal. And I think I got a bit of film grain here, right? The height fog I've added in, and that adds a lot to this scene. So you can see it's pretty much a dark scene with nothing. With the fog, it adds a bit of interest here, because I kind of wanted the light to come from this way, hitting the front of the subject, and it's sort of coming through this light. And I also added a particle effect here as well. Right. Very subtle particle effect. Every once in a while you'll see that come through. I probably made it a bit too subtle though. I come into here, I can edit that, and we didn't really cover this at all, but there's plenty of tutorials out there. So particle sizes, I think I made it too small. Maybe that would be better. You've got to let it charge in and warm up so you can sort of see these little dots come in. That's just like creating a bit of atmospheric particles. Although typically I'll do that in post anyways. I'll sort of paint them in Photoshop afterwards. That's kind of nice that you can do this manually inside Unreal. So going back to the height fog, I used a 0.5 in density and fall off 0.2. And I used a volumetric fog scattering distribution of 5. And in the light, which is this rec light here, the volumetric scattering intensity, I cranked that all the way up to 100. So if we go back to this one, check out this, I only had it to 4, but if I bring this to 100, you can sort of see that effect come through. I kind of like that actually. So instead of having it at 4, just cranking that up a bit. So what about 150? That's too much. I think 100 looks pretty good, right? So yeah, this creating two different moods, I think. So one's a really sort of spooky sort of looking thing, and one's a bit more of a neutral sort of, it's not neutral, but more of a front-on shot, right, with a nice butterfly light. I think I like this one more. It's a bit more cinematic. I did spend a lot more time on this one, but this one looks cool as well, I think. So play around with your lights, get different moods, different sort of look and feels. You can use more than one light, by the way. So in both examples, I've just used one light. You can use plenty. So even though a butterfly light has one light, typically, that's just the key light. So the key light is this light that sits above, and that's the main light. You can add more in areas where you want to. So for example, I really like the look of this, but I think the shadows here at the bottom are a little bit too dark. I can go ahead and add another light if I wanted to. So let's say another rec light, and then just bring that facing the subject a bit more, and then bring that into the areas where I think the light is sort of, you know, too dark, right? So I have this facing the other way, sorry. Oof. Right. So for example here, if I think the light is too, so if it's too dark here, I can just reduce this light quite a bit. And turn the shadows off the light. So it just brightens up this lower area a little bit more, right? So you can sort of see the effect. And it's still a butterfly light because the key light is this one here, and this is just acting as like a fill light. So you can add more lights if you want. So we have, we talked about the key light. So if I bring this up, 3-point lighting setup. So 3-point lighting, you can see that here. So you got your key light, which is your main light. That's the bright light, right? That's the main light. The fill light is to sort of lighten up like the other side of the subject, and the backlight, which is to bring the subject off the background a little bit. And it's a rim light, so you can sort of see a rim around the edges here. When you're adding more lights, a good way to work is to not just add all the lights in at once, is to add them in one at a time, right? So if I was to change this and add a 3-point light setup, I would turn this light off, and I kind of like this light here, so I'm just going to copy this, hide that. I would rotate this, put this into place. Say yes, that's my key light. Let's say I'm happy with that. I'm not happy with that. I just want to change that a bit. Let's say that's my key light, and that looks pretty cool, right? That's a nice sort of soft light split, so a half split almost. So not as dramatic as putting it right to the side of the character like that. Right, it's sort of on an angle a little bit. That looks really nice. But let's say I want to add the fill light. I'm going to come into here, add that fill light, right? This again is a softer light, so it's just to fill in the area, not take over the subject. So now it's overexposed. So I'm going to bring this fill light all the way back, like this. And typically what I like to do at this point is to turn off the key light and just have the fill light on, so you can see the effects it's having. So it's just slightly lighting up that side of the face, not taking over from the key light that we had earlier, which is this one. No, not that one. This one, not that one. This one. Right. So it's just brightening this area up a little bit, right? So it's not so dark like here. Right. And then we add the rim light, which is behind the subject. It doesn't have to be directly behind, but it's behind the subject like this. This is like a like the alien was caught by like the FBI or whatever, and the light's shining behind him. This is too strong. Right. So I'm gonna see the light flares coming in now, because the light is shining directly into the camera. So the light flares is really showing. You can see it within the shot here. I'm gonna bring this all the way out, and what I'm gonna do is just hide these first two lights, and we want to get a nice hit on to the edge of the character, right? Bring this over a little bit, and I'm gonna go to this the flare, or the bloom in this case. So it looks like the bloom was taking over, not the light flare. But that is a light flare, but the bloom was taking over a bit. So I might turn that off for now. Just for now, so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm gonna bring this over a little bit, and the fog is taking over a little bit, so I'm gonna take that off so I can see what I'm doing. You can see this is the rim light happening. So we can do something like that, or put it on an angle like that a little bit. It's going to do like it directly behind the camera. Not directly, but a little bit over. Bring that close enough so we can actually sort of see it. So now I'm going to turn all three lights on, and we should have a nicely lit up scene. That height fog is just going nuts. So I might have to go into this rec light and reduce the volumetric scattering by a lot. So I might even turn that all the way down nearly. just turn that off. So I don't want that fog coming through so hard. And then turn my bloom back on, which was over here. Great. Might increase the intensity of that bloom on this character. And this is a really cool shot. So it's really nicely lit and you can see everything, but we're not having this flat light that just brightens everything all at the same level. There's varying different sort of intensity. So it's more intense here, then it's less intense here, but you can still see the subject. So there's some shadows and it creates a lot more visual interest. And then we've got this rim light that sort of brings the subject off the back. So I'm going to bring this back a bit because it's too much. I only want a little bit like that. That looks nice. Like that. Okay. And then, yeah, this is a nice shot. I kind of like this one more now than this one because you can see more of the details. I think this is a nice cinematic sort of shot, but this one kind of looks really cool. Great, so that's manually setting up the lights. How about if we have a sort of scene, or if we want to sort of quickly light something up without messing around too much with things. So I'm just going to save this. So save all. And this will be our main one. So I'm just going to create a new level. So new level. This will be the new lighting setup. So I'm just going to create empty open, right? Or empty level. I don't know what the difference is. So let's go to this one. Great. So we drag our characters in again and put them at 0. So I'm going to quickly set this up. I had this to 20, I think. And I had him rotated 90 degrees. And he was up about 440, I think it was. And then the character's material is already set up. So I'm just going to drag and drop that into the scene. Oh, he's backwards. So let's go 180. -90. There we go. And I'm going to create that camera again. So that was in the toolbar, cinematics, and cine camera. I'm going to change this viewport to cine camera and keep cinematic on. Right, so we have. So I'm just going to put this guy in shot, and the camera's backwards. So he's not backwards, I'm backwards. So. And I'm just going to do like a full body shot like this. I might put that on an angle. Right. And I'm going to power through the next parts because we're just going to go through everything that we did earlier. So I'm going to quickly just talk and then just get everything set up. Right. So in the camera we use a DSLR full frame, and I'm going to bring this forward a bit more. But first I'm going to probably leave that as is. So 35 would be good for a full body shot, I think. Or maybe like a 55 or something like that. Bring this closer so see everything. And then I'm going to adjust the focus to the subject of the character, subject of the image. I think that's it for this. Yeah, so let's add our post-processing volume. And let's go to our toolbar, volumes, and where is it? Post-processing volume. Right. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit and just make sure it's unbound is ticked. And then adjust our exposure. Right. Tick all these three, change this to manual. Right. So we're pretty much done. All we've got to do now is add our environment, lights and things like that. So in the menu bar at the top here, we can go to Windows and Environment Light Mixer and just add all of these guys here. right? You'll probably notice that nothing has changed at the moment. So what we need to do is go to our post-processing and then go to exposure and just crank that up. And you'll start to see everything sort of light up now. Great. So the light is hitting the back of the model. So I was working backwards for some reason. To change the light, all you have to do is press Control L, and this little gizmo at the bottom here will pop up, and that's how you change the light. So up and down on your mouse will be moving the light or rotating the light up and down. So if you bring your mouse down, it'll be like a nighttime scene, kinda. If you bring it up, it'll be like a daytime, midday sort of scene. And then left to right will rotate your light around. Right? So we kind of obviously want the light to be facing the character and something bright but not too bright. So something like that. Whoops. For now would work, I think. And I'm just going to get rid of this so we can sort of see everything. Right, and I'm going to change this to game view so we don't see any sort of icons or anything like that. And then, yeah, we're pretty much done with that. So we can just adjust this if we wanted to get the right sort of exposure here. Of course, we can go into our light itself, which is the directional light in this case. And then, well, before we do that, let's go into our fog and enable fog. Scattering distribution, we can play around with that. We can do all that as we did before, and then in our light we can adjust the volumetric scattering intensity. Great. And to soften the light out so you can sort of see it's quite sharp, shadows. If you want the light to be softer, you just increase the source angle. Right? So 5 probably won't be enough, so we just got to crank this number up to like, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever you're happy with. Right. Great. So another thing we can do here is just add a few, like a studio backdrop sort of thing. I'm just going to right click in my contents and then add that. So this is the one I did in class earlier, which I think I popped that to my desktop and I named it backdrop. So just whatever default was will be fine. I'm just going to drag and drop that into the scene and then rotate that. So you can scale this up. So I want to make sure he's like sort of standing on that. So like that. So you can see there's a nice shadow there. And I'm going to increase the size of this so it's so everything's captured, right? Just by scaling it up. And then you can just make a new material here. So I'm just going to right click, create a new material. This will be backdrop. This backdrop can be whatever you want. Unscored matte. Right, so I'm just going to drag and drop that in there. Double click this material node. And then we can add a constant. That will be like a black and white. So if we pipe that into our base color, and gave that, let's say, a 0.4, 0.5, it'll be like a grayish sort of color. So maybe a 0.3. Maybe 0.3. Right. And then press apply, you'll see this change in the background. Right. And this will create a nice sort of studio light for us to work with, a studio backdrop. And if you want the lights to sort of bounce off the backdrop and up a bit more, you can increase the specularity or reduce the roughness. So just by adding another constant, so just copying and pasting this one, we can add that to there and then reduce the roughness to, let's say, 0.1. So it's a bit more shinier. You can see we got a bit more shine in the background. The light will bounce off this and sort of hit other areas. I think that's a bit too shiny, so I'm just going to go 0.5. Right. So you can see that lighting setup is quick, it's easy, you can get something that looks pretty good fairly quickly. And again, you can go through all the post-processing volume stuff like we did in the other one for this one here. It's just a simpler sort of setup, but you do end up with something, I think, not as interesting, but you can get a nice sort of clean look, I think. So you just got to weigh up what you think is what you think looks good. Bring that down a bit. So that's a nice full body shot. If we wanted to go in for a nice sort of headshot, or maybe like a waist upper body sort of shot like this, we can do that. You can see all the nice details. Great, and that's pretty much it for lighting. I'm gonna save this as main 2. I do like this one a lot more. I do tend to manually set up my lights. I think that's a nicer way of working, because you can get something that you're really happy with. You can really fine tune everything. So the next part is to render this thing out. Now I'm going to be honest, I don't remember how to do this. So what I normally do is watch a particular video on YouTube every single time I want to render something out from Unreal, because it's still fairly a new thing in Unreal. So it's more convoluted than it needs to be, I think, anyways. So I'm going to link you that video in Discord or Canvas for you to take a look at. But that's pretty much it.